Alright, YouTube, North Korea is rambling about missiles and atomic weapons again. The idea that Kim Jong-un's claim of, oh, we're going to put nukes on long-range missiles is perhaps hot air. They do have nuclear weapons. They do have long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. The problem is their nuclear technology is so backwards they can't actually fit them on missiles. They don't have the level of miniaturization necessary. They also claimed, for instance, with their last test, oh, it was a hydrogen bomb. No, it wasn't. It was a primitive atomic weapon, as evidenced by the magnitude of the resulting seismic event. They're probably going to be in that stage of development for a good decade or so at their level of growth. It's not even clear that their regime will last long enough to ever see boosted fission, let alone a true multi-stage modern nuclear weapon. So I wouldn't be too worried about that, but Trump's response was a little bit different than what we've seen in the past from Obama or Kerry or somebody like that. Typically, when North Korea does something that's blatantly in disregards to common sense, Obama's response is, oh, I condemn this, and then he shuts up and does nothing. Trump, on the other hand, says, oh, North Korea is talking about achieving missiles that can hit the United States with nuclear weapons. That will not happen. Now, this takes the form of two claims, actually. The first layer of it is it's very unlikely that in the next 4 to 8 years North Korea is actually going to be technologically capable of doing so. I think Trump understands this. The nuclear threat of North Korea is slightly overblown. I would be much more worried about them taking some sort of device and fitting it on a submarine and idling it off the coast and hitting another country that way than firing something from North Korea itself. And you've got to understand, if North Korea were stupid enough to fire 1 or 2 long-range missiles at us, it would be very, very easy with our current level of technology to knock them out of the air long before they got to our shores, and we wouldn't actually get nuked by them. It would be just a cause for us to go in and nuke Pyongyang. So I'm not particularly worried about the North Koreans. I think we have much more to worry about an increasingly antagonistic China than any other nation currently in the world. I don't see Russia as the main nuclear threat. The main nuclear competitor, yes, they've got thousands of nuclear warheads. China's the one that's being more antagonistic now, though, especially among nations that we have military alliances with. North Korea is a piss in the sea, essentially. So that's just their normal warmongering. They also declare over and over that they will flatten South Korea, that they will nuke Japan, that they will reunify the peninsula for the glorious DPRK, that the Chinese are subhumans and they're going to invade them too. If you listen to Kim Jong-un's speeches to the North Korean people, more or less he projects the image of himself as being capable of taking over the world, which clearly is not actually going to happen. It's a backwater in a military sense. Most of their equipment is outdated. The biggest threat that they pose isn't even with nuclear weapons. It's with all the artillery they have pulled up on the DMZ, fully capable of leveling, several tens of miles of land south of the DMZ effortlessly. Yeah, they could do that. It would cause millions of deaths. But the idea that Trump would respond this way, I think, is a breath of fresh air, honestly, because we haven't had somebody in the White House in quite some time that actually is willing to respond in perhaps kind with people like Kim Jong-un. We've had someone there who draws a red line. The red line is crossed and does nothing. Now, honestly, I support the idea of doing nothing in Syria. In fact, we should do more nothing, because right now Obama is also arming a bunch of terrorists over there. Trump has said he's not going to do that anymore either. Well, I think it's great. And he's got idiots like John McCain facing off against him on that issue. Oh, well, we need to protect our allies over in Syria. What allies? We don't have any ally. The FSA is not our ally. The FSA is a little more than a mercenary movement that we've been funding, that in turn funds ISIS. I say abandon them and let them all be slaughtered, because that's it will bring peace to Syria faster if we do so. It would arguably be better to let the Russians stay in Syria unperturbed, or maybe we can work with them to crush the FSA and ISIS, and it'd be easy. You'd have the two best militaries in the world going in together to do this, yeah, it wouldn't take very long. You know, you get the Russians in there. They're more willing to ignore perhaps the international laws and do some of the dirtier work, like torturing people or whatever. Let them handle that. We've got other advantages ourselves. The Russians have advantages. We should be partnering with them more and more closely, in my estimation. We should be trying to undercut the Chinese by partnering with the Russians. I don't know if any of these idiots ever thought of that. I think Trump has the right idea on that token. As far as North Korea is just a small backwards vassal of China. I don't think even many of the North Koreans really realize this. I think Kim Jong-un is slowly losing his mind at this point. For real, as in not just an act. When even the Chinese are stepping out of the way. Now, the Chinese are no allies of the Western forces within the UN, and yet even they step out of the way and allow sanctions on North Korea after shielding them for decades and decades and giving them basically everything they could possibly give to them. China is attempting to straddle a dangerous middle line where they can appease the world community to be able to continue selling goods, to be able to continue funding its growth, because it got too ambitious. It started that process. It can no longer pull back on it without collapsing its economy. They're stuck in this position. But at the same time, they want to maintain this buffer between sort of the Western... If Korea reunifies under South Korean-style leadership, becomes fully democratic and so forth, it would be an economic juggernaut. You're talking about taking the raw resources, which right now are extracted relatively inefficiently in North Korea, specifically rare earth metals, on a scale that even China itself does not possess. That's primarily why they've maintained them for so long, well after the military component was no longer particularly useful. Being amalgamated with the high efficiency, the enormous technological capabilities of South Korea, it would be the next Japan. It'd probably be the third or fourth largest economy in the world very quickly. Once order is restored, once infrastructure expands, it would take relatively little effort. You can be sure the United States would be pumping money into the Korean Peninsula to help accomplish this. And pretty soon, China's economy, compared to Korea plus Japan, would be small. You'd have these two relatively powerful states right next to China that would be competing. We ourselves, the U.S., would be buying Korean rare earth minerals. We wouldn't need Chinese minerals anymore. We wouldn't need Chinese processing anymore of, rudimentary goods for computer parts and so forth. And that would fuck the Chinese economy, at least on some ends. It would harm their growth. They're in a no-win situation. This is one of the main concerns when I say China is probably going to stagnate and or begin sliding backwards. It's because of the Korean situation, too. As far as North Korea's atomic capabilities, though, they would have to load their weapons on planes in order to actually use them at this point. Now, that may work against South Korea or China on an off day, if the Chinese are feeling especially lazy with their radar. Other than that, there's really not that much they can do with these weapons. We have constantly a military presence around that region. If they tried to go for Japan, they'd be shot down. If they tried to go for South Korea, chances are they'd be shot down by the South Koreans before the plane even crossed over the DMZ. It is hot air on that token, but the response from the United States is more robust than it has been for almost a decade. For almost a decade, we've sat by, condemned things in a diplomatic manner. And people like Obama and Kerry do not appear to understand. North Korea is so insular that sanctions do very little. It's so insular that it doesn't care about your diplomacy. It considers people in this country to be subhumans. Their state propaganda even refers to their Chinese allies as subhumans. I wonder why the Chinese got tired of giving them free food. They're also going through a period of instability because I believe they're still in a drought and famine at the moment. Well, that's not great news. Now, there are people in North Korea that know basically that the outside world is not the hellhole Kim Jong-un casts it as. There are people in North Korea that don't support the regime there, understand that it's fundamentally screwed up and that it's actually mostly smoke and mirrors. That being said, though, there are a lot of people in North Korea who don't realize that. Maybe the old guard North Koreans. I like to watch North Korean TV too, because it's like watching TV here from the 1980s or something like that. A lot of militarized theater performances and weird documentaries and music videos and weird shit like that. It's fun, but it is a dangerous regime. But it's primarily dangerous to our allies, not to us. They do not have the capability, nor likely ever will, to actually attack the United States. If they fired off a nuke at Alaska, yeah, maybe it would land. Okay, it lands out in the middle of an iceberg somewhere, something like that. One casualty. A group of seals or something like that. I wouldn't be too worried myself, but it's nice that you sleep sounder at night, perhaps, knowing that the person who's actually the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces isn't a total idiot and doesn't think that international globalized diplomacy solves every ill. There was a time in American history where we understood that. Where we understood that sometimes you gotta act alone. You can't rely on the UN to protect you. You can't rely upon some global organization to do all of your work for you. You have to take responsibility for the well-being of the people within the nation you represent. Obama has never understood this. It's one of his greatest weaknesses. So North Korea, not a threat to us physically in the sense that Kim Jong-un's talking about. Certainly a threat, though, to some of our major allies in Asia. We may, at some point, have no choice but to take Kim Jong-un out. I hope it doesn't happen anytime soon. It would be freakish to see millions of North Koreans be killed, because they would. Whether we use a nuclear response or not would barely make a difference. The Chinese may very well Zerg rush the northern part of their border, if that happens, in order to claim land for themselves, create a smaller buffer state, create a new province or something like that. They'd be the ones conducting a large-scale slaughter, probably. They'd probably be settling Chinese people in that land, a la the Israeli settlements or something. I've compared Israel and North Korea before, by the way. Some people say it's an unfair comparison, but here you have two states relying upon outside aid for their continued survival, that have nuclear weapons without signing the NPT, and that are expanding into their neighbors' territory, or wish they could. In North Korea's case, they openly talk about wanting to do so. There are similarities there. Quite clearly. It's just Israel, of course, has modern nuclear weapons, isn't suffering from the incapabilities of the North Korean regime, and isn't totally isolated because the UN is run by the Western world. That's the only real difference between the two. That's about all. Peace out.